All right. So the why. What is my purpose? A lot of times creatives and designers, they'll rush into projects because they're under time constraints or they just have a whole bunch of projects that they have to get to, right? And we very rarely do we get to take the time to stop and step back and really ask some fundamental questions. My dad is a 30-year Marine, and besides some of the things he used to tell me, be polite but have a plan to kill everybody in the room, sort of mottos. I don't stick with that, but one of the mottos he came up to me and told me about was being master of the obvious. When you're going into projects, stop, ask some basic questions before you plow forward. If you got a lamp on the table, it's not turning on, the very first thing to do is not to go and take it apart and see if the wiring is wrong. What's one of the first things you might want to do there? To see if the damn thing is plugged in, right? Yeah, so be the master of the obvious. Start with some basic questions before you dive into projects. There's an author named Simon Sinek. He has a TED Talk, one of the most popular TED Talks out there, and it's called How Great Leaders Inspire Action. And in it, he talks about a pattern, or what he calls the golden circle. And what he says about normal businesses, normal people, they usually start with what they do and how they do it. And they say, they start with that premise. And he said, great leaders, people who influence and do a better job at leading people, start with the why. They know the why, and they start there. It's sort of their North Star. They start with a premise that this is what I'm going to base all the creative or non-creative projects that I'm going to move forward with, but I have this why. This is why I do this. Why are we designers? Why are we creatives? We got to try to get to that answer before we start anything else. He used Apple as the inspiration there, obviously. Everybody uses Apple for everything, but it's a pretty good reason why. They do a pretty good job of continually innovating every year. And Apple starts with that premise. What do they say? We push the status quo. We think different, right? We also happen to make some computers. Buy my computers. But the reason why it works so well is that you can just substitute that last part for the next thing they do because their North Star is true. They're innovators. They're disruptors. Buy my phone. Buy my headphones, right? People will buy into why you do things, not so much what you do or how you do it. So we need to get to that as designers. We need to find what that North Star is, right? And it's not an easy thing to do, but we do need to start with that premise. And if you don't have one, my creatives, my designers in the room, if you don't have one, that's fine. I'm going to arrogantly provide one for you today, all right? So raise your hand if you're a designer, if you're an actual professional designer, a student who's looking into getting into design. That's great. Okay, good.
Does instructional systems designer count?
Absolutely. If it says design in there somewhere, we can really stretch it. I think it works. All right, so I'm going to start with this premise, the why. Designers are problem solvers, right? Designers are problem solvers, but to do that the most effectively, we have to follow some rules. All right, so if there's three things I want you to take from this talk, it's here. I want you to approach creative projects, design projects with intentional design, with it being research-driven and goal-focused. All right, we're going to start with those three things. So when I say design with intention, what does that mean? All right, there's universal principles in design, right? It's why I can't just open up a canvas and start tossing on things there and it just work. There are reasons why things work, why things flow, why things make sense in design. Let's start with universal principles. We're talking stuff like type hierarchy, color theory, maybe the 80-20 rule, golden ratio. This is formulas for good fundamental design. That's designing with intention. I'm intentionally putting something in the top left corner because that's where our eye starts. And then our eye cruises to the right, down the page like a Z, and across again. That's not just made up. That's the Ogilvy Z, right? These are reasons why these things work. So when we're designing, we have to be able to defend our design reasons why we're doing things. And it starts with intentionality. It starts with principles. So we need to design in that sort of sense there. So this leads me to the next thing. To be intentional, you also have to be research driven. Benjamin Franklin said, by failing to prepare, you prepare to fail. I love that. I think that's great. Who are we designing for? Who's our client? Who's their competitors? What's the product? What's the industry? We have to be informed about the product in order to be intentional about our work. We have to do that research. We have to be experts in our field in that particular area where people are hiring us to do a job, right? So designing with intention, research driven, comes to my last point here, and I think the focus of what I want to talk about today is being goal focused. We can't solve problems without defining what the solutions are going to look like. This makes it very difficult. So we have to know the goals. We have to figure these out. And I'm going to talk about goals, and I'm also going to talk about goal alignment, which is a big deal. So intentionality, research-driven, goal-focused is where I want everybody just at least take from this talk, okay? So I just mentioned here goal alignment. Now, the biggest issue with goals, besides not having them, is goal alignment. Has anybody heard of the AI alignment problem? Right? Yeah, it's. I have friends who think I'm obsessed with it. My girlfriend thinks I'm obsessed with it. But there's good reason, and it's all the more relevant now. There's a new documentary coming out called AI Doc: How I Became an Apocalyptimist. I said it right too. I didn't screw it up. But it's out now. It's streaming, I think, on Apple. You can rent it. And it talks about the AI alignment problem. And the AI alignment problem is the fear that artificial general intelligence, when given a particular task in unlimited resources, even though it's a benign task or maybe an innocuous task, can ultimately wipe out humankind, right? Not intentionally, just because its goals are not aligned with what our goals are. There's a misalignment there, right? If you've heard of the philosopher Nick Bostrom, he came up with the paperclip maximizer problem. And what he wanted to do was pick sort of this very benign sort of situation where you wouldn't think it could lead to the end of the world, but he demonstrated how goal alignment could actually lead to that. And the premise here is, if we have generative AI, and that's generative AI is just AI that can teach itself and it gets better at what it does on its own without any type of retraining. We're getting to that point. It's coming close. But the scenario is we give it this task to maximize the production of paperclips, which seems pretty, all right, how the hell is that going to lead to our end, right? But in its zeal task to accomplish that and its own goal alignment, it doesn't take into account our goals. It's indifferent to our goals. So it starts taking human resources away, like water and the natural resources we need to live. Not because it's mad at us or trying to kill us, but because it just doesn't care, because there's no goal alignment, right? So if you're familiar with Sam Altman, he's the CEO of OpenAI. He says that AI will likely lead to the end of the world, but in the meantime, there'll be some great companies created by serious machine learning. Wonderful, right? But Sam Altman is talking about the end of the world. He's talking about AI alignment problem. We have to be aligned with these things that are smarter than us, or it could lead to disaster. So aligning goals matter. And so less existential. I'm a younger designer for that company I was talking about, ADS, Environmental Services here. We're a water and wastewater company. Very smart engineers put devices within our pipes to make sure that they're flowing the way they need to. And very sophisticated material that goes in these pipes. So again, working for some of the smartest people in this town, in the country, by the way. I was a designer and trying to learn how to design. And I was, again, I mentioned before, I was the jack of all trades for designers. I was doing web, I was doing email campaigns, I was doing print materials. But one really cool thing I got to do was booth space design, convention space design. And we spent some money on some booth spaces. We had this one we went to every year called WEFTech, and it was in either Chicago or New Orleans. It was cool because I got to travel to both. And I got to design all the booth space, and I got to travel there and help set it up. And it was really great work. But when we were designing these, and we had a year to put these things together, we're spending $50,000, $60,000 to go to this event. We're spending $30,000 on booth space by itself. And engineers would come to me and say, this is what needs to go on these walls. And I had walls, I mean massive walls. I had 6 of them. And I got to put things on them. It was brilliant. So as engineers do, what do? They give you, a headline, a paragraph, and 10 bullets to go on a wall, right? And I'm a young designer. I don't know. I'm trying to do my best here. I'm trying to follow what they say is what is necessary in order to get these projects done. But what I did do is ask a fundamental question. It's like, what is the goal here? So I got a big paragraph and I got all these bullets, and aesthetically it looks like shit, but I mean, I'm trying to do what they tell me to do. So you go to them, ask, what's the goal here? What are we trying to accomplish? And engineers always have really straight, logical answers to these things. Well, we need to inform people in the convention center of what we do, what our products can do. I mean, we had numbers and like, uh, you know, feet per second and all things on these bullets. These are technical things. And they'd explain, well, they need to know these numbers because how else would they know if our products are effective? How else are they going to know? We need to inform. So their goal of the wall was to inform as much as possible anybody walking by what our products were, what our services were. Okay, that made sense. Hard to argue with that. And I go back to marketing and sales, right? And say, look, I'm putting these things on there that looks atrocious. I don't know what to do here. And I say to marketing and sales, well, what's your goal here? Marketing and sales, they're responsible for showing ROI on this convention booth space, spending $60,000 on booth space. Their goal was different. Their goal was to prove that going to this conference was going to lead to money, right? So they had a different goal. Their goal was to get people to stop and come into the booth and have a conversation with one of our sales guys who could then get them into a demo and then make a sale. And if the sale didn't get made, then we can't justify spending all this money on these dinners and flying salespeople in to do what we want them to do. So I went to marketing, and marketing says, no, our job in this booth space is to keep people to stop walking by our booth, come in and engage. I need a compelling design. What is more compelling design? Big imagery, maybe a headline. That gets people to stop, come in, have a conversation. Goal alignment. Engineering, different goals than marketing. But marketing was in charge of the budget, so marketing wins, thank God. And we got to design better booth space. And it does its job, right? So goal alignment matters. We have to make sure that when we're setting goals, we're still aligning those with our stakeholders, our clients, our customers. So that's really important. All right. So we talked a little bit about goal alignment, and let's talk about the thing we all came here to talk about, God. Goal-oriented design, right? I was going to put the picture of Trump on here as Jesus, but then I was like, oh no, he's a doctor. That didn't make any sense. So I moved on. Okay. So let's talk about beyond aesthetics here. Let's meet Alan Cooper. This dude is cool as shit. So I didn't meet him. I learned about Alan Cooper in school when I was doing UX classes, right? So he's an amazing guy. My UX guys probably are familiar with him. I didn't come familiar with him until the last couple of years. He's the father of Visual Basics, and for my younger crew in here, that's a programming language that he sold to Microsoft in 1995 for like $1 billion, and then he started his own firm called Cooper, where he still to this day makes really good software. My regular designers in here should know who he is because he's kind of the inventor of personas. Everybody know what personas are? These are, the fake accounts that you create for people to design for. Personas, avatars, right? He came up with goal-directed design, which now I confiscated and made goal-oriented design. Prior to Alan, software development was all about adding new features to software products, jamming them in there and telling people this is what you need. Alan came around and was tired of having failed projects. And he said, we're doing this wrong. We need to change our perspective. We need to look at this from the user-centric point of view. We need to set goals that are based upon our users' goals. It's different. We're not forcing things on them. We're thinking like one of our users will and what would be most effective for them. He changed the way we thought about it. I'm reading going through his book right now. It's very dense. But if you go through it, you see all these design rules that we now have in all graphic design books. He started this. It's pretty impressive. Um, and then I've reached out to a few UX buddies asking, what should I know? What should I know for around goal-centric design? And the biggest thing that I kept getting from other people was an empathy, being able to empathize with your users, being able to put yourself in their point of view makes a difference. It makes for more successful projects. He said, define what the product is before you design how the product will do it. It seems so simple and it seems so rudimentary, but nobody was thinking like that before him. It's pretty amazing. So I want to take his concepts that he used in software design, and I want to step back and take them into going to any creative or design projects. The goal part is the biggest thing. Who are you trying to get to do or use our services? So when we take this approach, I think projects become more effective, they become more focused, and we really align our goals when we do that. Okay, so let's get into what we were really talking here. What are design goals? Where do we start? A lot of us know about design briefs in here. In order to move forward with any design project, we got a design brief. But in order to have a good design brief, we have to start with some rudimentary questions. This is my dad speaking again. Be the master of the obvious. What are some rudimentary questions we want to ask before we get into design projects? The first thing I want to start with is, who are we designing for? This goes back to Alan Cooper's personas, right? User-centric goals. Who are we designing for? Good design can influence, but only if we know who we're designing for, right? How are we going to influence the people that we're trying to influence if we don't know who they are? What motivates them? Everybody's heard of ethos, logos, and pathos, right? We learned about this in school. It's key. This is Aristotle's treatise on trying to understand what motivates people. And he said, and many other people agree, those main three things start with ethos is credibility. Are you somebody in the space that has credibility in order to influence people? Everybody can think of some people like that, right? They know their space well, they have the experience, they have the education. When they talk, people listen. When they listen to credible people, we're talking about ethos. This goes back to designing intentionally. I'm not going to willy-nilly try to understand how to influence people. I'm going to go to some basic structure here. This is where it starts way back with the philosophers. And we talk about logos, right? Logos is logic. I'm going to connect with people through a good argument. These are usually empirical data. Engineers love this. They want to see the data. They want to see the analytics. They want to see the numbers. This is connecting to people through logical arguments, right? The next one's pathos, right? This is the one I think is the strongest. It's emotion. It's love, it's hate, it's fear, anxiety. Why do you think medical commercials are so powerful? Everybody's scared they're going to have the thing. All that's emotion. Emotion drives people. It's heartstrings. So there's three basic ways you can influence people, but I don't know which one to employ in my design, in my ad, in my work, unless I know who my audience is. If my audience isn't driven by emotion and I'm talking to engineers and I'm sitting up here and throwing big, pictures and trying to draw on their heartstrings, and all the time they just want the numbers, I am missing the mark there. I don't know who my audience is. I don't know how to talk to them. I'm not following Alan Cooper's thought around user-centric design, user-centric goals. I'm going to miss the mark. So knowing all this will help you be intentional about how you design. All right, so that's the first question. Second question is, what makes a project successful? This is the core of why I want to talk about today. A lot of times this question is never even asked. This is where we start understanding the goals of a project, but more importantly, like I said before about AI alignment and about my scenario with building good designs for conference space, it's about aligning goals with your stakeholders, clients, and customers. We have to align those goals. We have to be prepared to answer that question because a lot of times our stakeholders don't know the answer to that question. You are the professionals in the room and you're asking them stuff that they might not know. You have to have your own answer. And then when they do have an answer, let's compare. Let's figure out where we can meet in the middle or where they're wrong or where you're wrong, right? We have to have that conversation. Do our preconceived goals match with the client's goal alignment? Unclear goals equal unhappy clients because of misaligned expectations. I'll give you an example here, a pretty simple one. I'm a designer. Somebody comes to me and they want a logo mark designed, right? Most of my designers have been in this situation. And so I ask a basic question. I start with where I should start. I say, what's going to make this project successful? I talk to my client and I say, what makes a good logo? In your mind, what makes a good logo? And I'm going to say this next answer because it just happened to me. This is a real world example. It just had experience. The answer given was, well, I think the logo should look and convey like what we do as a business. Let that stew for a second there. You've got to design a logo that looks exactly what they do as a business, right? It's rough. So I can think of 6 or 7 different answers that are better than that answer. Answers like, how about simplicity? A logo should be simple and it's unique and thus what? Memorable. Memorability is probably more important than having a logo look like what your business does. How about timelessness? A logo that'll stand the time that doesn't have to be redesigned every 5 years. Ask people who design logo, word marks in like Papyrus or Comic Sans. Tell me how that logo is going to last. That's not a timeless logo, right? Let's talk about scalability. Does a logo look good on a business card as well as a billboard? That's pretty important. If I didn't ask the question and I go forward and I'm using my intentionality, I'm doing my design research, I'm using principles of design to design something good and come up with 3 comps and put those in front of this client who I never had this conversation about aligning goals, and their expectation is that my logo is going to look like the thing I do, and you present to him, what happens? Unhappy customers because misaligned goals. And she is wrong about what they value in what a logo should look like. It doesn't matter. It's hard to get that back. It's hard to get that first knee-jerk reaction of your work back because you did not ask the question. You did not have goal alignment, right? I would have gone to that client and say, all right, if you think it should look like what you do, tell me what a Nike swoosh has anything to do with about athletic apparel. What an Apple has anything to do with computing. Tell me why you think it needs to look like your business. And we have a real conversation. We align our goals at that point. I understand clients are clients. They get to tell you what to do if they're paying you. And if at that point they're still convinced that it still needs to look like what they do, then, good luck. But at least we align the goals. Now we have expectations, and now we can at least call it a successful project from their point of view, right? So again, aligning goals matter. So, who are we designing for? What makes the project successful? The next thing I want to concentrate on here is, how do we know? Right? How do we measure that success? How do we know it, besides gut feelings? How are we going to prove that, no, we had a successful project here? And we run into this issue all the time. It's very hard to do that sometimes. This is the hardest part of all this. And sometimes we don't have time. And I realize some of this is idealistic, but that's what we should be. We should try to strive for the best possible scenarios. Getting metrics from projects allows us to improve. Use those as baselines for the next year that comes around. I can show that I can do better next year. I can't do that if there's no metrics, if we're not trying to understand what makes success, right? So we need to go beyond feelings. We actually have to connect the dots. We're talking about like KPIs, right? My marketing guys in here knows what KPIs, key performance indicators. These are things that we're going to use as metrics. And that's where my marketing team before talked about ROI. These are key metrics here that we're going to use. So we're talking stuff like for ad design, social media campaigns, web development, app development, SEO. We have tools to use to see if we're successful. What are some of those tools? Google Analytics, using UTMs, right? QR codes, conversions, MQLs, SQLs, SALs. MQLs, SALs, SQLs. Is that the right order? Right? So there's ways to measure. We need to establish the way we're going to measure those to our clients, our stakeholders, and customers early on so we know the barometer we're going to use for success or not. Right? So that's important. And then you come back to me and say, all right, I get that. There's some tangible things. You're talking about web stuff. You're talking about clicks. That makes sense. You can get some metrics from that. What about logo development? What about brand identity? Those are harder. They're almost intangible. How do you figure those out? There's ways to do that, right? My UX designers will talk about qualitative testing, focus groups. You can get focus groups, you can go online, you can get focus groups together, put comps in front of them, ask which one moves them the most, which one makes the more sense. Now you're getting some data. My UX designers will talk about quantitative testing, the surveys. You can put those out to the world, get some information back. You have some analytics of things that were seemingly intangible. How about A/B testing? Put them out in the real world. This is real world testing. You can toss two logos out there. Which one gets you to do what you want them to do, or which one conveys the thing you want them to convey? There's ways to go about it. It's not easy. I'm saying these are the things you should try to strive for when you're approaching design goals, to get answers, to improve, to get better, and to prove that your projects are successful. And these are just ways to go about that. So again, ask some basic questions, be the master of the obvious, start who we're designing for, what makes this project successful, how do we know? How do we measure that success? Okay, so in practice, this is where rubber meets road here. And I'm titling this one, I'm going to be fired, because this is the case study here. All right, so a bit ago, I was doing a lot of freelance work at the time, and there was this startup company called Mark II Ventures, and 5 founders, 5 brilliant people who were involved in starting this company, and they were going to invest in smaller SaaS-based companies, software as a service company, to take them to market and really expand on it. And these are PhD level people. These are no joke guys that have done this before, taken small business to $1 million sales and stuff like that, and they were getting together to be like a super group. I knew one of them very well who got me this project. And the project was to do brand identity, logo design, brand style guiding, and a website, which I can do all those things. I thought I could, right? So I was really excited about it because one of the biggest dollar freelance projects I've ever gotten. It's good money. So I was really excited about it. Startup has tons of money, but only for like a little bit. You got to ride that train quick before they bail out. And I was riding that train. So they came to me and they said, this is what we do. And I met them and we had these kind of, we had beers together and like, all right, run and let's create this thing. Because I've done it 100 times before. What I didn't figure out is that 5 founders means 5 different opinions, 5 different strategies. I wasn't dealing with one CEO. I was dealing with 5 brilliant know-it-all people and trying to get them to be on the same page as what I was trying to convey. It's not as easy as you think. It's not easy at all. So I started in. I was designing some comps for some marks that I thought were kind of impressive, and I had these kind of backstories I was putting to them, and I was really impressed with myself on how well I was doing. In the first couple of weeks, I had a couple conversations, and I put some stuff in front of like 2 or 3 of them. They gave me some feedback, and 2 of them really liked this thing. Good, I did some iterations, gave it back, but showed the other 2, and they hated it, and then it was going on. I'm a month and a half, 2 months into this, and we were all getting very frustrated. I wasn't making headway with them. I wasn't explaining well enough what my design style was and what my thoughts were. My friend who got me the job came to me one day and said, hey, everybody's really frustrated. And I said, yeah, I know. I understand. I can read a room. And he said, I think they're going to fire you. And I said, I think you're right. I'm probably going to get fired here. I was bummed because it was a lot of money. But also I was bummed. I didn't want to fail. I thought I was good at this. I was frustrated. And so I said, give me one more week. I'm going to do a Hail Mary here. And what I decided to do was just slow down and ask some basic questions. I was going to figure out why I wasn't doing well here. And I started searching on, all right, what are some basic questions you got to ask two egocentric founders and get them on the same page? What are questions about brand identity that I need to know? And I really did some research. I really dived into what are great questions to ask. And I found a ton of different resources for it. And I melded them together, but I kind of changed it based upon what I thought and what the business was doing. And I went back to Alan Cooper's work. And he's got huge sections in this book about how you do interviews, how you interview users, that user-centric design. And I was going to treat my founders as my users. These are the guys I got to impress. These are the guys I got to get my designs past. So I changed my frame of mind. I was designing things that I liked, that I thought were cool, and they weren't getting past. I need to change my mind on how I approach the whole project. So I did a ton of research. And I conducted 5 separate interviews. And they were an hour and a half long. I remember they were long. I recorded them, the interviews, audio recording. And I compiled the data. And the cool thing that I found is that when I started to understand my audience, when I started to do intentional design, when I started to conduct the research, the answers just started to flow by themselves. They weren't contrived. They were just coming out. And it was wonderful. I had like 20 some questions, and each one of them had different answers. But what I found was that most of them had very similar answers. And that's what I had failed to realize before. I wasn't making those connections. I wasn't getting goal alignment because I wasn't going down the path to get the goal, to get that goal alignment. I wasn't conducting the research. So I did all of it. I compiled it all. I started finding patterns. And then what I decided to do is do a presentation. And I was going to lay it out for these guys as best as I possibly can. And so I did. So Mark II Ventures brand identity, what I did was I took each one of those questions. I had each one of them answer it, and I put their answers up, and then I summarized at the bottom. This is each one of my founders. This is the question I asked in the top right. Who is their ideal partner? What's their target market? I had all their answers compiled, and then at the end here, I summarized each of the questions. And I worked my way down, asking everything from who their competition was, who they liked in the space. I started compiling. I took all the audio and I had a transcribe, and I found the biggest words that kept happening and over again. I was understanding them. What do they think the most important things for their partners, their customers to feel? It was confidence, right? So things started making sense because I was just doing the work. And as I compiled and had more of these summaries come out, I started really understanding who they were, what they were trying to do, and what they were trying to accomplish. I was getting goal alignment, and I wasn't even trying. I didn't even know what that was. But what was happening was the summaries made me realize how many things they all agreed upon. I couldn't get them to agree to anything before. And now things were coming out that just totally made sense. All the way down to what brands they admire. If I'm designing a logo, Mark, that looks like a brand that they hate, what do you think their knee-jerk reaction to that is going to be? If I'm getting a little bit closer to brands that they admire, now we're getting closer to what they feel is success in a project. I got all the way down to even asking if your business was a public persona, who it would be. Bill Campbell, Carl Sagan, Warren Buffett, Robin Williams, and Matthew McConaughey. All right.